Hello, I'm Vishnu Prakash, and today I'm going to present my idea on how terrorism has evolved in US. So, for decades, terrorism has shaped the security of the United States in a number of ways. In the 1970s, large-scale bombings were very common, and in the recent years, we have seen high casualty attacks. But how exactly has the terrorism changed? Are attacks happening more often, or are they just deadlier? And are the counterterrorism policies keeping up with these trends? And today, our analysis is going to answer all of these. So let's start with the bigger picture. How terrorism incidents changed over time. In the 1970s and 1980s, attacks surged mostly by domestic extremist groups. But after 9/11 attacks, uh, incidents dropped, possibly due to stronger counterterrorism policies. However, in the recent years, there's been a resurgence. This suggests that while some reforms of terrorism have faded, new threats have been emerging. But it's not just about how often the attack happens, it's just about how they happen. In the past, bombings were the most common type of attack. Explosives were used in the major events like the Oklahoma City bombing in the 1995. But in the last 20 years, something has changed. Firearms have now become a primary weapon in the terrorist attacks. This is concerning, unlike bombs, because bombs require planning and restricted materials, but firearms are much easier to get. This makes the attacks quicker and deadlier. So, where do these attacks happen? Major cities like New York, California, and Texas have historically been the most important targets. But when we look at the number of the deaths, the story changes. Some states like Nevada and Oklahoma don't have many attacks, but they have seen some of the deadliest events in the US history. The Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 and Las Vegas shooting in 2017 both resulted in massive casualties. Uh, So to prove this, this bubble chart helps us understand this pattern. Each bubble represents a US state and the size of the bubble shows the average number of people killed per attack, while the color represents the total number of fatalities in the state. Larger bubbles mean deadly attacks on an average, while darker bubbles indicate states with high total number of deaths. Some states have fewer attacks but high death toll. For example, Nevada and Oklahoma have larger and dark bubbles, meaning the attacks are less frequent, but they're extremely deadly. And events like Las Vegas mass shooting and Oklahoma City bombing caused massive casualties in these states. And on the other hand, smaller, darker bubbles indicate a dangerous pattern. To explain this case, in states like California, Texas, and New York, attacks happen often, but their bubbles are smaller and darker. This means that while incidents are frequent, they also have a consistently high total death count over time. So this shows that while terrorism is often linked to the big cities, small single major attack can redefine a state's risk profile. But how have these policies responded to these trends? Major attacks in the US have shaped counterterrorism policies and public awareness. The 1995 incident highlighted domestic extremism, while 9/11 attacks led to the most sweeping security reforms. More recently, the Las Vegas shooting became the deadliest mass shooting in the modern America, raising concerns about firearms in the terrorism. The key trend in the recent attacks is the surge in the wounded victims. While the past attacks have had high fatalities, modern firearm-based weapons leave more injured survivors, many with life-altering consequences. So this shift means terrorism impact is no longer just about deaths. It extends to a longer trauma and recovery for a growing number of survivors. So does a higher number of attacks mean more deaths? Not necessarily, because in this chart, the marker size represents wounded victims, while trend lines show attack severity over time. Some attacks like 9/11 or Oklahoma City and recent mass shootings stand out as rare but extremely deadly, while bombings once dominated, firearms are now the weapon of choice, leading to both high fatalities and a sharp rise in injuries. Unlike explosives, firearms prolong attack, allowing for more casualties before intervention. The trend suggests that terrorism is evolving not just in frequency but in its method and impact. This raises an important question. If modern attacks are deadlier and are harder to predict, how should counterterrorism policies adapt? So, what does all these mean? Terrorism in the US is evolving while group led attacks have declined. But lone wolf terrorism, often carried out with firearms, has introduced new challenges. Unlike explosives, which are heavily regulated, firearms remain widely accessible, making mass shootings one of the deadliest forms of the modern terrorism. This raises the question, are our counter-terrorism laws still designed for past threats while failing to address today's emerging dangers?